Wednesday night, or whether you're catching a replay, super, super grateful to have this time to connect with you as we explore, God's word, which we believe is the blueprint to God's best. God's word is the blueprint to God's best. The Bible is the blueprint to God's best, to life as the Creator intended, life that leads to human flourishing. And I'm just super, super grateful to have the opportunity to connect with you. I'm always excited to teach this book because this book literally has saved my life. Not just saved my life in the sense of salvation or in the sense of an eternal destination, but it has saved my life, not just in terms of its the truth that I receive that's going to get me to heaven, but no, it's the truth I'm receiving that's actually going to change my life on earth. And frankly, that's our obsession with the blueprint. Every individual that takes purpose seriously is an individual that is going to have to discover something I call a unique agitation. If you've read my book, Your Purpose is Calling, you're not unfamiliar with the term unique agitation. It speaks to a holy discontent that God divinely deposits in your heart for a specific thing, meaning you and I might be able to walk in a room and see see the same thing, but see it two different ways. It might bother you. It might not bother me at all. Why? Because the unique agitation that I have for that thing may be a sign that I'm assigned to do something about that problem. Now, there are certain things that should bother us all, right? I mean, injustice should bother us all. Immorality should bother us all. But there are certain realities that might not necessarily be sinful, but they're not profitable for humanity. And God will give us unique burdens for that. And my unique burden, particularly when it comes to Christianity, is the absence of practicality. It is what I've found is we are really good at getting to heaven, and but we are not great on living on earth. And what Jesus says is, I came to give you life. Now, we know that life consummates in eternity, but like eternity is not just a destination. Like eternity speaks to not just the quantity of the time you get with life. It speaks to the quality of life that you and I are supposed to have. One writer put it this way. He said, Jesus didn't just come to save lost lives. He came to seek and save the life that was lost. The life that was lost in the garden was a life that was retained and reacquired on the cross. What Adam broke, Jesus fixed. And man, this is the essence, the foundation of the gospel. And so anyway, the implications of it begin here on earth, not just when we get to heaven. We experience the benefits of it here on earth, some of the benefits of it here on earth, not just when we get to heaven. And so when there is like information with no application, when there are principles with no practicality, it just agitates me. That's the Goliath I want to tackle. And my argument is you're not really a disciple unless you can do it. It's one thing to quote it. It's another thing to read it and study it. But it's another thing to do it, to take the truth of scripture and say, how do I live out this truth in every single area of my life? The way I manage my money, the way I raise my kids, the way I handle conflict, the way I handle stress, the way I handle marriage, all the things as it relates to life. The Bible says God has given us all things that pertain not just to godliness, but to life. To life and godliness is what Peter says. And so as long as I have ability to teach this Bible, it is going to be biblical information that's building the bridge to application. Period, point blank, is going to show up in real life. So you're probably rarely going to hear me doing a series on the rapture. Not that that's not important. That's just not something, not that I hadn't studied it. It's just you're probably rarely going to hear me doing a series on that. Not because I don't know it. I mean, I don't know when the rapture is going to happen, but the point that I'm making is I've understand at least my view of eschatology. Here's the point that I'm making is when a person comes to the blueprint, we're going to take the truth of scripture and we're going to build a bridge of contemporization to everyday life. Here's real life. I got a whole community. It's closed now, but I got a whole community, and it's probably the thing I've been excited about something like this in a very long time, called Real Life Seminary. And we're taking anyway, I'm not even gonna get into that. It's close. But the point that I'm making is that's what the blueprint is about. I think, I don't know why I got on my soapbox with this. I was having a conversation with some friends recently, and I just kind of, I was just expressing some of my holy discontent. I was doing a coaching call on one of the programs I'm running now in the marketplace called Elevate Collective. And it's this brilliant young lady that's a part of our church. And she's so genuine and sincere. Valley, I think is her name. And I might be mispronouncing it. But she's so young, and she's one of the youngest people in our programs. And my wife and I just have great respect for her, because typically people that are her age aren't doing the kind of inner work that she was doing. And one of the things that I did as a person, my wife and I, at least I think about 20 years older than her, one of the things we shared to us, like, hey, we just kind of want to issue an apology on behalf of our generation, because we felt like we didn't necessarily equip your generation, like previous generations of church didn't equip, like we kind of equip you for morality, but not life. So you know how not to sin, but you don't know how to survive and thrive, what life's going to throw at you. And not that what we gave them was incorrect, but it was incomplete. And so anyway, I want to have a practical conversation today. We're going to use Galatians chapter 2, Galatians chapter 6, verses 2 through 5. I want you to hear what Paul says. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else, for each one should carry their own load. We're going to have a very biblically based practical conversation today. We're going to take this truth of scripture here that was not written to us. It's written for us, though. And we're going to build a bridge of contemporization that applies to our everyday life. We're going to look at what this text meant for them and what it can mean for us. And we're going to have a conversation around this subject, toxic empathy. Somebody put get ready in the chat. Toxic empathy. And I want to start this time of teaching by asking you a question. Have you ever experienced or witnessed what we call in culture an intervention? An intervention. Have you ever experienced it? Meaning, have you ever been a part of one, or have you witnessed it, whether it was in reality or maybe witnessed it through something you saw on the internet, television, etc.? For those of you that may be unfamiliar with what I mean when I say intervention, here's what I mean. An intervention is a deliberate attempt to help someone recognize a destructive pattern before it destroys them. It's in a deliberate attempt to help someone recognize a destructive pattern before it destroys them. This is important now. I use the word destructive intentional, because sometimes people can be experiencing destruction, not aware of the destruction that they're experiencing. So they need an intervention to give them a revelation that you are worse off than what you see. That you are underestimating the impact of this activity, that you are like a frog that is boiling in water and you don't know how at risk you are. So you need a warning. You need a holy rebuke. You need an intervention. You need a gathering of people who care enough to confront you about what is destroying you. An intervention is what happens when love refuses to stay silent. It is an application of Paul's admonition to believers in Ephesus and Ephesians when he tells them to speak the truth in love. An intervention. Now watch this. In many ways, this is what the entire book of Galatians is about. We call it the book of Galatians, but it is actually a letter, an epistle that the apostle Paul writes to believers in a region. Now this region now we would call Turkey, but it was a region then called Galatia. And it is no ordinary epistle. It is actually an intervention. See, if you look at Acts chapter 13 and Acts chapter 14, you'll see Paul founded churches in this particular region during his missionary journey. He preached a biblically based gospel, the gospel of grace, that salvation comes through Christ alone, not through adherence to the old covenant law. And those believers in Galatia had initially received this gospel of grace and were walking in it. But when Paul leaves the area, there's a group of teachers who infiltrate that area, and they were called Judaizers. And they began to dismantle what Paul taught. And I'm not going to bother this too much, but this is why it is incredibly important. It is incredibly important to understand what I call the principle of proximity. That your welfare and your well-being is not just determined by who you are. It is equally impacted by who you with. Why? Because whoever has your ear has your future. Come on. And this is why one of the most important decisions you and I could ever make is who we choose to give access to our ear. What if I told you that humanity was, that God's intention for humanity was almost undermined because of who Eve and Adam listened to in the garden? What if I told you that sin and dysfunction and strain and struggle and stress entered the world because Adam and Eve did not discern who they should not listen to? Come on. Adam initially had got instruction from God, from his creator, who had given him very clear boundaries he was to operate by. Every tree in the garden you can freely eat except for that particular tree. So he's very clear. But here comes somebody else. It's the work of Satan, guys. Law first mentioned. Here comes somebody else trying to disrupt and to sow doubt into the accuracy and the validity of what God had already shared with Adam. And just like the enemy did it in the garden, he's doing the same thing in Galatia. So here's what the Judaizers start teaching, that in addition to Christ, believers still needed to be circumcised and observe. Circumcision was a symbol of the covenant, and observe the Mosaic law in order to be truly saved. So they were adding requirements that grace removed. They were putting people back in a yoke that the gospel had freed them from. Here's what we would call it for those of you who you follow our teaching ministry on Sundays at our church, a church I lead called Change Church. I did a series a while ago. It's on YouTube. It's called Detox. And one of the areas we addressed is something called legalism. And so, which is what many Christians are discipled into, and what many Christians are being discipled into now. What I found is legalism always gets, in every generation, it gets very unique momentum. It's really, really weird. Anyway, that's a different conversation. But anyway, the point that I'm making is that's what's happening here in Galatia. So Paul gets word of it, and he has to write them like he's writing them because these people are being influenced by this teaching. They're submitting to this teaching. Paul gets word of it. He's not in Galatia. So he writes this epistle, and he's like, who bewitched you? I think that's Galatians 3. He said, who bewitched you? He said, I spent all of this time teaching, laying foundation for you, and now you've been bewitched. You've been deceived. He says, you're trying to perfect in the flesh something that began in the spirit. What's up with that? So the entire letter is a spiritual intervention. And so Paul spends the first 5 chapters confronting the unhealthy beliefs that corrupt the community. And I'm going to tell you something. Nothing destroys Christians like Christians. I don't hear anybody talking back to me. I said, nothing destroys Christians like Christians. We pick these culture wars with culture, but these individuals were corrupted not by the world, but by the religious. So he spends 5 chapters confronting and exposing these unhealthy beliefs that were infecting this Christian community. And he concludes here in chapter 6 with something really interesting. He concludes the intervention by teaching the Galatians how to help people who are drifting, while at the same time, look at this, without becoming people who enable them. So I want you to see the context of chapter 6. So he's concluding the letter by saying, all right, there are going to be some people that are drifting. But let me help you help people that are drifting without becoming people that enable them in your attempt to assist them. And here's where good intentions can end up, watch this, good intentions can end up in poor execution if good intentions are not influenced by the right information. Come on in here. I said good intentions can end up in bad execution if good intentions are not informed by, influenced by, guided and governed by the right information. So Paul's like, hey, I want you to help them without becoming the kind of person that enables them. So one of the first things that he says something in verse number 1. Let's just read this. Let me go to the Holy Writ. Let me go to the Holy Writ here. I want you to look at Galatians 6:1, and it says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual. That's the first verse, right? So it means that every Christian isn't adequately equipped to address another Christian that has fallen into sin. You who are spiritual, that's key. Not just you who are concerned, but you who are spiritual. Like everyone isn't equipped for interventions. Some people, when they see someone falling into sin, self-imposed nuisance behavior that is inconsistent with God's intention for their life, self-destructive behavior, some people, when they observe that, it should lead them to intercession. It means you should pray. But he says, you who are spiritual, meaning you who are governed by the scriptures and guided by the Spirit. You should, the word here is restore someone in the spirit of meekness. NIV says restore them gently. One translation says in the spirit of meekness. And that word restore is a medical term used to describe the resetting of a bone. Did y'all hear what I just said? It says gently. One translation says spirit of meekness. The other says restore gently. Why? Because if someone has a bone broken and it's out of place, how do you restore that? Gently. Gently. Gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit. It doesn't mean you're not assertive. It doesn't mean you aren't strong, but it means you aren't impulsive and insensitive and abrasive. And here's what I mean when I say you can have good intentions that end up in poor execution if the good intentions are not guided and governed by right information. Abrasiveness is not a fruit of the Spirit. It's just not. It is actually evidence of immaturity. It means that you have not experienced what Dallas Willard calls the renovation of your heart to the degree that even when you have good intentions and good motives, you can't govern or you can't exercise what Paul calls temperance, the fruit of the spirit, that you can't exercise temperance even in your delivery, in terms of the way in which you're actually going to help people. Now, this is really, really something that's important, because I think sometimes people with apostolic and prophetic gifting use that gifting as an excuse to violate the way Paul says handle people. Now, I'm not even going to bother this, but these giftings, which I'm not going to get an argument here. But Paul clearly says in Ephesians 4, these are gifts. And if the person wants to say it's whatever, but Paul clearly says these are gifts. All right. And so in the way you govern your life, and in the way you govern your life and the way you use your gifts should be guided and governed by the scriptures and the spirit. I don't get to be a jerk just because I'm prophetic. It's the right. So even those with prophetic gifting, when you have to say hard things, there's a difference between the substance of what you're saying being hard and your style being harsh. You aren't bold. You're underdeveloped. This is why I got really mixed feelings about what we call call out culture in Christianity. Now, I'm gonna be honest, my feelings are mixed. I feel like there are instances when call out culture is biblically supported, right? Because the Apostle Paul, like clearly, I mean, he goes so far as to call names, like Demas has forsaken me, and beware of Alexander the coppersmith. Like there's a degree of biblical support for making individuals aware of someone who is in the company and the context of believers who might not be healthy and helpful for your spiritual growth. So I agree with that. I think my issue is the way in which it is often done in contemporary Christian context seems to be inconsistent with the way Paul did it, because let's say when Paul's writing to Timothy, he mentions Demas to Timothy. Alexander the coppersmith is in that epistle. He doesn't talk about Alexander the coppersmith to Rome, to believers in Rome. He doesn't talk to Alexander the coppersmith to believers in Corinth. So when people just get on the internet and start lambasting people, I'm wondering, is this call out culture or clout chasing in the name of Christianity? To me, it's not even courageous behavior. It's courageous behavior when you say it to them. It's not courageous behavior when you're talking about someone and you're saying something about someone that you won't say to them. So the reason I got mixed feelings is like, okay, what is even Jesus' admonition to, like, hey, if there's issue with a brother, if this person's a brother or sister in the faith, if there's issue and you got access. So sometimes I'm wondering, it's like, these people that you calling out, have you called them? That's when you really a spiritual gangster. Did you even DM them before you? So Paul says, restore gently. Well, I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to fix you. It says, restore gently. One translation says, considering yourself that you may also be tempted. That the same person that's doing the restoring in this season may be in need of restoration in another season. So the way you handle people needs to take that into consideration. All right, listen to this. Listen to this now. Listen to this. And so in verses 2-5 now, which are the verses we read, he begins to give them practical principles on how to carry out verse 1 without enabling. Because here's the issue. He says restore gently. He knows some people can interpret that to mean be soft, be casual, be avoidant. And Paul says, okay, in your attempt to restore gently, you got to make sure you're not assisting in a way that's enabling them. So watch what he says here. Watch what he says here. There are two scriptures I want you to lean into. Verse 2, he says, carry each other's burdens. In this way, you fulfill the law of Christ. Then in verse 5, he says, each one should carry their own load. Are we here? Carry each other's burdens. Then verse 5, each one should carry its own load. It seems contradictory, but it isn't. He's not being contradictory here. He's not being inconsistent here. He's being very particular, very intentional, very strategic, because there are two different words here that he uses for in verse 2 and in verse 5. In verse 2, he says, carry each other's burdens. There's a Greek word he uses there that's different than the Greek word he uses in verse 5, which says each one should carry their own load. So the word here for burden is a word that describes baros. It describes an overwhelming, crushing weight, something so heavy it exceeds one person's capacity to carry it alone. This is the weight of a crisis, the weight of a catastrophe, the weight of responsibility, where a person is being buried and needs community to come alongside them. And God designed the body to be weight bearers for each other. So a person loses a spouse and they got 3 young children. They're going to need the body to help them bear that weight. Come on in here. Come on in here. Come on. Right. So they're going to be catastrophes and crisis that people experience, and they're going to need the body to help them to carry that weight. We're built to bear the weight of one another. This is something someone cannot carry alone. But in verse 5, he doesn't use the same Greek word. When the word he uses for load is a word fortune, and it's used to describe a soldier's personal backpack, the assigned weight that belongs to an individual on their journey. You got me? So he's saying, like, some language translators for verse 2 have used the word boulder, like a crushing weight, like bear the boulder. Okay, there's a boulder on top of them. Help them bear the boulder so the boulder don't crush them. Then the imagery for somebody carrying their own load is backpack. He's saying, help people bear the boulder. They need to carry their own backpack. When we start treating other people's backpacks like they're boulders, come on. Now we've gone from enabling to assisting. And Paul is warning against the confusion of these two things. He's drawing a line between what the community is responsible to carry and what an individual must carry alone. Am I making sense? And this is a warning that is relevant for any of us. When we carry someone's backpack, here's what we're doing. We're not helping them. We're harming them. We're interrupting a divine process. And that interruption has a name. It's called toxic empathy. It's when you feel so deeply for the person that you rob them of the very load God designed for them to carry themselves, because it's going to develop them. It is your care. Your care for them becomes a curse to you. It is toxic empathy. You can be good in intention. So it's good to have empathy. The Good Samaritan had empathy. The Bible calls for empathy. But empathy can be executed poorly when it is not informed biblically. It's like, okay, you've got empathy. That's authentic. But what's guiding and governing that empathy is not the truth of Scripture. So now it's been executed poorly. So now that empathy is turned toxic. And toxic empathy is the unbiblical expression of empathy that adversely impacts the giver and the receiver. It causes the giver to assume responsibility that will eventually overwhelm them and undermine their own purpose. And then it robs the receiver of the opportunity to experience the adversity that leads to growth. You grew through hard times. They need some too. And I'm going to wrap up with this because I know this is a lot. Just in case you're assuming you aren't wrestling with toxic empathy, let me just give you 5 signs and symptoms of it, just so that you're accurately diagnosing yourself. Here are 5 signs or symptoms of toxic empathy. Number 1, you avoid hard conversations to protect people's feelings. Matthew 18:15 says, if your brother sins against you, go to him and tell him his fault between you and you alone. This is not a suggestion. This is a command, even with a process attached to it. Avoidance is not an option for Christians. When you bypass the conversation because of an emotion and not because of an assignment, you're prioritizing your comfort over their correction. It's not about them. It's about you. Now, here's why this is important. Now, I said conversation you're on assignment. Now, every time you see something, doesn't mean you aren't supposed to say that you're supposed to say something about that. Sometimes there are hard conversations that need to be had. You're just not the one that's supposed to have them. It's one thing when you've discerned that this isn't a conversation I'm supposed to have, right? That's not toxic empathy. That's obedience, right? Sometimes other people need to have those conversations. That's completely different when it's a conversation you're supposed to have, but you're unwilling to have. Ephesians 4:15 says, speak the truth in love. And toxic empathy inhibits a person's ability to execute this particular admonition because it will remove truth in an attempt to preserve the feeling of love. Toxic empathy. You avoid hard conversations to protect people's feelings. Number 2, you consistently make exceptions for the same people. Come on. This is really personified like in David. Like David would kill Goliath, but you almost let Absalom kill you. You would deal with Goliath, but you wouldn't deal with the Amnon and Tamar situation. You just keep making exceptions for people. And when you consistently absorb the consequences of someone else's choices, you're disrupting a divine agricultural metaphor called the law of sowing and reaping. You are letting people sow and you're preventing them from reaping. And in doing so, you are deceiving them about how life actually works. Number 3, you feel responsible for outcomes that belong to someone else. Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 20 says, the soul that sins shall surely die. The son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. Because individual accountability is a biblical principle rooted in the character of God, people should have to answer for their own choices. And when you carry the emotional weight of someone else's outcomes as though their results are your responsibility, you're operating outside this framework. Now, this is really, I think, a reality like when it comes to kingdom entrepreneurs, particularly when you want to lead your team based on a biblical work ethic. And then there are times and situations where you have to transition people off your team into God's next, particularly when they've been engaging in behavior that is not good for the culture or not good for the company in and of itself. And a lot of times what happens is people start thinking about, oh my God, they got this and they got bills and and all of that stuff is true. And I think people should feel that and take that into consideration when it comes to how they release a person, not necessarily if they release a person, because the truth of the matter is that person should have thought about all of those things before they made the decision that they made. They should have thought about their bills. They should have thought about their responsibility. They should have thought about, and it doesn't mean that you don't feel that. It doesn't mean that you don't have that feeling. It means that that feeling does not have you. Like I could take this and I could draw a line to parenting and how this shows up in parenting, how people can set punishment and not hold it. It's like, hey, if they don't learn consequence in the house, they're going to learn it outside the house, and they're going to learn it with people who don't love them the way you and I do. All right, here's the 4th one. You lower the standard rather than raise the person. In Nehemiah 6, you remember, Nehemiah refused to come down from the wall when his adversaries pressured him to do so. He said, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? See, the standard of the work was non-negotiable. And here's what happens when there's toxic empathy, whether it's in your personal relationships, whether it's in your religious relationships, whether it's in your business relationships, what we end up doing is this. We quietly adjust the requirements. So we lower our standard instead of raising the person. We call it flexibility, when the truth of the matter is compromise. And finally, number 5, toxic empathy. A sign and symptom of toxic empathy is when you're more committed to their comfort than their development. Here's what Hebrews 12 says. It says something so powerful about discipline. Hebrews 12. Let's just read it together, because I feel like I think Dr. Dudley and I even did a teaching on this. If not, yeah, I think we did, because we did. I think we did a teaching on Hebrews, and I think the teaching was like, it's about to get better or something like that. But we talked about correction, and we can only grow to the degree to which we're willing to be corrected. And here's what Hebrews says about correction or discipline. Endure hardship, verse 7. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you're not legitimate. You're not true sons and daughters at all. However, we all have human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while, as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good, in order that we might share in his holiness. Listen to verse 11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time. It's painful. People don't love correction. It's naive for us to expect people to love correction. It's painful. Later on, however, it produces what? The correction, the discipline, produces a harvest of righteousness. Look at this. And peace. For those who have been trained by it, for those who will submit to the correction, to those that will adjust their behavior for the correction. This is what happens. And very often we can be more committed to a person's comfort. Oh, this is going to hurt their feelings. This is going to hurt their ego. This is going to impact our relationship. We're more committed to their comfort than their change. It's toxic empathy. It hurts the receiver and it hurts the giver. So the question is, Pastor, how do I address it? 3 ways. Number 1, address your inner world. Toxic empathy is often driven by needs you and I have that are operating underneath the surface. It can be a need to be needed, a need to always be seen as the one who comes through, a need to avoid the discomfort of conflict. Toxic empathy exposes something in us that need to be addressed. And we often blame the people when the people are actually only receiving what we're giving. 1 John 4:18 says, perfect love casts out fear. So much of toxic empathy is rooted in fear. Fear of the other person's reaction, fear of the relationship fracturing, fear of being seen as hard or cold. But love that is perfected casts fear out of the equation. So I got to address my inner world, because it's not them, it's me. 2, I got to alter my understanding of empathy. For some of us, there needs to be an adjustment there. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. So this is a very clear-cut biblical call to empathy. But weeping with someone is not the same as carrying the weight of what they're weeping about. We can be fully present in someone's pain without assuming ownership of their fortune, their backpack. And number 3, arrest your impulse to overextend yourself. One of the most overlooked expressions of toxic empathy is not what you feel, it's what you do before you got time to think about it. It's your default reaction. I'm running a program now called Elevate Collective, and it's about emotional wealth and relational health. And one of the lessons we covered recently was on what we call an internal operating system. And how we all have these default instincts and impulsive and subconscious behavior towards certain things, like to remove boundaries and not hold boundaries or to overextend ourselves. And we have these impulses that are a result of habits, and these habits are a result of like ingrained behaviors that we've consistently and regularly engaged in. And I think it's important for us to realize and to recognize that that impulse may be there for a while, but we need restraint and we need discipline to be able to arrest that impulse so that we don't harm others and harm ourselves. Listen, when we don't address toxic empathy, it overwhelms us and it undermines it undermines our ability to carry out God's purpose for our life. Because when you become responsible for somebody else's irresponsibility, you don't have the margin and the makeup to be responsible for what you're responsible for. Secondly, it not only overwhelms us and undermines our ability to carry out God's plan and purpose for our life. Secondly, it arrests the development of the other person. There are consequences they don't get to experience. And as a result of that, there's growth they never get to have because we keep interrupting God sowing and reaping, law sowing and reaping. And here's what will happen. If we keep interrupting God sowing and reaping, now God not only has to deal with them, he got to deal with us because we keep getting in his way. And it will get to a point where God's like, if you keep getting in my way, I know how to move you. And my prayer is that God will give us the grace and give us the wisdom to discern when is my empathy, Jesus, when does my empathy become toxic? Man, I hope this added value to you. I'm going to wrap up our time together right there. This is a Selah moment. We want to do some we want to do some reflection. I want to pray. Just kind of pray a prayer of discernment and discipline for us. To everything, there's a time and a season. For some of us, this is a season to make an adjustment with the way we've been handling empathy. And I want to lift us up in prayer. Lord, those are coming on the screen right now. Ways to give. And I'm super, super grateful and thankful for each and every one of you each week who sow into the field that you're harvesting from. You know, I'm just so against what we call reactionary theology, which is avoiding subjects because somebody else has abused them. I don't believe you fix wrong teaching with non-teaching. You fix wrong teaching with right teaching. And God honors generosity, period. He blesses the tithe and the offering. And so as you give today, we just give with that in mind. So super grateful for you. And to those of you that are in our new community, Real Life Seminary, what I've done is you're going to find this in your portal. You're going to find in your portal my teaching notes from tonight. You're going to find another resource I created for you called 5 Ways Toxic Empathy is Hurting You. And you're going to find a set of self-reflection questions for you to do a deeper dive into this subject matter. Okay. So for those of you that are in Real Life Seminary, it's going to be in your portal. It's actually in your portal right now. It's a portal that says Blueprint Notes, and you'll see all 3 of these documents there so that you can take a deeper dive, or you can get with some of your other classmates and you guys can